little bit about how your personal journey inspires the way that you look at diversity. JoAnnn, I'll start with you.
I'll start by saying that I grew up in Alabama, in a little town called Lewis Island, which is as far south as you can go in the state. We lived on the Mobile Bay. My brothers and sisters were all 8, 9, and 10 years older than me. When they grew up, it was still very segregated, and they had to attend the black Catholic high school when they grew up. When I came up 8 years later, I attended the white public school that was closest to my house. And so I often talk about we grew up in two very different Souths. And they talk about what they went through during that time period. And I think that has a lot to do with the person I am today, because even though I was in Alabama in the 60s and 70s going to school, I ended up being the president of the school, the first African American ever to be the president of the high school that I attended. And then I came to, and I often tell the story that when I went to a Jesuit college and I came to Washington, D.C. to intern, and I tell people I never realized how poor we were until I came to Washington to see what everybody else had, because we grew up on a small island. We always had plenty of food because, you know, we had seafood, we had all of those other things. We had farming, so it wasn't an issue of food. But you know, my dad never made over $15,000 a year as an engineer working on a merchant marine. And so I think in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about those who are less fortunate and more vulnerable. So part of what I do as the CEO of AARP is to say that no matter what we're talking about, our business strategy ought to include low-income and multicultural markets in every single thing that we do, and that it's not a side program. It has to be integrated into the overarching strategy. And I think a lot of that comes from my upbringing and really the experiences that I've had up until this point.
What about you, Arnold? Does your background inform the way you look at leadership, and particularly the way you look at inclusion?
Yeah, I think JoAnnn just set me up to let you guys know how old I am. She said her siblings were 8 or 9 years older than her. So I went to an all-boys black high school because we were segregated. So I'm a lot older than you are. Yes. And the reality is that it, of course, it shaped you. You know, the times shape the person more than the person shapes the times. And so when I was growing up, it was, you know, civil rights and Martin Luther King, man going to the moon, JFK assassination, all that. And so it was a time of change. And I was lucky. I was getting a great education. Our high school is extremely successful. You would know lots of people from there, but some of them are often broadcasters and musicians and athletes and a few business people. And so we believed anything was possible, because in that environment we were in, where society was trying to tell you you were second class, you weren't good enough, the high school was constantly telling us 3 times a day, gentlemen, prepare yourselves, you're going to run the world. And you can do anything you want to do, you just have to be disciplined and no excuses. So yeah, you're going to be picked on because you're black, and yes, you're going to, you know, people are going to judge you and all that, but you can let that be an excuse, or you can somehow figure out a way to rise above it and still deliver, so no excuses. So that shaped my mindset, but it also shaped because we had other experiences. I had a chance to go to 2 prep schools in the summer, Andover, Phillips Andover, and Phillips Exeter Academy. So, and you know, Bobby Seals was a speaker, you know, Black Panther, and so all this stuff was going on. But it opened my mind because I came from New Orleans, and further south even than she was. Grew up the same way, you know, seafood and whatnot, very poor. My dad built our house. He made the furniture himself. He wired the house, did the plumbing, everything. And he was a carpenter, but, you know, he didn't get paid much because, you know, they wouldn't pay him much. And my mom, you know, worked as a domestic. And so, you know, we grew up very poor. But that whole environment of possibility, you know, great education, and just believing in possibility. So for me, what I discovered along the way was the following things. Communities thrive when businesses thrive. And I discovered that at an early age. So you can be in any community, and when a business goes out of business, that community suffers, okay? Health, education, parks, recreation, everything. For businesses to thrive over time, I learned at an early age, they have to innovate. And if you don't innovate, you get passed up. I mean, you know, new things come along, Uber, Airbnb, whatever it is, okay? And it passes you up. Innovation, by definition, is diversity of thinking. You innovate, you're doing something outside the box. It requires diversity of thinking, and you are far more likely to have diversity of thinking if you have a diverse group of people organized around a common objective, you know, with inclusion, so that they all have equal voice, equal opportunity, equal reward, and they will generally out-innovate a homogeneous team every time. And I've helped transform 3 industries doing that, and it is real. It's a real business imperative. And so my early upbringing, you know, where no excuses, all things are possible, being around lots of different people and seeing how the world changed when you got lots of different people working on things together, you know, all that kind of reinforces kind of my current way of being. So.
And Tim and I actually have something in common because we grew up a stone's throw from the same communities.
Right.
About the same time. We are now mourning that it's been 93 days since we've won a world championship in Boston, and it's not looking good for basketball.
Right.
Keep your fingers crossed. I'm a Celtics fan too.
I don't know, man. It's not looking so good. We may have to wait another 5 months, but it's so rough being a Boston fan. But I mean, you and I grew up at a time when Boston was just rife with racism on display. Yeah. That's part of what motivated me to be a journalist, because I felt like there needed to be more people like me talking about our communities, not just as victims and not just as predators. How did that influence you, and how does that influence the way you look at diversity?
So first of all, everybody, thank you for being here, and I appreciate your investment in yourselves and thinking broader and hearing from some great leaders around their thinking. Bertha, to your point, and just for people that said it, so I grew up in 1972, I was living in Hyde Park, which is a neighborhood in Boston, and you had the beginnings of forced integration of the school system, which was an experiment to try to get integration in the school system. I was in 2nd grade, and at that point, it was just about to go into being. It hadn't quite passed yet, but the violence that you saw as a 2nd grader in school was just staggering. And to be clear, similar to the backgrounds that you heard from JoAnnn and Arnold, we didn't grow up with much at all. My dad worked 2 jobs. He was a Boston Edison. He read meters, and he worked at night at the Boston Herald. And my mother was a cashier in a supermarket. And I remember asking my parents, like, what was happening? Like, why were we seeing buses on TV and our neighborhoods being burned and people throwing rocks? And trying to understand why people just were violent all the time and so emotional about it. What motivated me was seeing that, but then also understanding at a very young age, not everybody gets a fair shot. And what would the world look like if everybody got a fair shot? Unfortunately, we couldn't stay in Hyde Park, and we moved 3 miles over to the suburbs, and it wasn't much better, but it was a little safer at the time for a family of 4. And the school I went to was a very working class school, and my parents taught us 3 basic values. They taught us, number 1, to work very hard. They taught us, number 2, to be honest, and they taught us, number 3, to be respectful. You notice I didn't talk about education, so I wouldn't have made it close to Andover or Phillips Exeter, to be clear. I graduated in my high school class somewhere in the 300s out of 550. I don't have a childhood memory of doing homework, but I have a childhood memory of respecting people. My senior in high school, my biology teacher told me I would never amount to anything in life because I hadn't focused on education. And what motivated me was this fact that everybody deserves a shot. And the values my parents taught me were different than some other kids, but they were certainly very important values. And it has motivated me in life to make sure everybody gets a fair shot at the end of the day. And when I look at the busing crisis from 1972 and 1974, when it was at its peak, it was very emotional because I wondered why everybody wasn't getting the same fair shot. I'm also happy to tell you, next year, I'm going to be the commencement speaker at my high school, and I can't wait for that. So I'm hoping he's in the audience.
Hoping he's still around.
That's awesome.
That is sweet revenge indeed. So how do you implement those values as a leader, and how do you approach diversity at your organizations? A lot of people think of AARP as just, a little group that has a lot of power in Washington, but you have a staff of 2,300. And then on top of that, 60,000 volunteers, 3 different types of divisions, all of which you've worked at. How do you look at making sure there is diversity at AARP?
For those who are not familiar, AARP has 38 million members. We're the largest membership organization in the world. We have the largest magazine circulation and passed People magazine last year. So we reached 25 million households every month with ATM the magazine. And so the impact that we have, I think, not just here in the US, but setting a conversation worldwide about aging, the future of aging, and what that looks like, I think has tremendous impact. But I think that more than anything, I show up every day and treat people the way I would want to be treated myself. And I think that I learned that as an early age, that in order to, anybody can be a leader, and you don't have to be just at the top of the organization. You have to be able to, and I often tell people that my biggest job is to clear the way for other people to do their best work. How do we get rid of the barriers so that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed in the organization? And I think we do a terrific job. As I was preparing for this panel and talking about AARP, I'm the first female CEO of AARP since our founder in 1958. And I happen to be born in 1958. So it's, so over the course of the last 60 years, looking at AARP, and at the core of who we are is about how do we make life better for people over the age of 50, and how do we bring about social change, because we're I tell the staff all the time, we're a social change organization with 38 million members, not a membership organization that does social change. And I think that is at the core of what we do to impact communities all across the country. And as a leader, I think it's our responsibility for each and every one of us to show up in communities that really drive social change, not just in traditional Caucasian communities, but in communities all across this country. And I hope that our staff, and as you said, our 60,000 volunteers, feel that sense of urgency and sense of passion about how we can make life better for people as they age all across this country.
I was impressed that you have spearheaded this program with your best life at every age, and one of the things that you looked at was caregivers, and particularly millennial caregivers. And a majority of them are people of color.
Absolutely.
And 1/3 of those people of color earn less than $30,000 a year.
I think the significant point here is, at some point in your life, you're either going to need a caregiver or you're going to be a caregiver. And the majority of those who are providing care right now are women. Almost 60% are women. And if in fact these caregivers were paid, because a lot of them are not paid, they're family members who are providing care, it would be close to $500 billion in annual economic activity. And so think about the fact that the majority of them are women, minority. As they're taking time out of the workplace, their work environment, to provide care for a family caregiver, they're also paying less into the Social Security system. They're also having reduced benefits for taking off. And so this issue of caregiving is huge, and it hits the African American and the Hispanic community at a much heavier rate than it does for the rest of the community. And so it's something that we have to focus on, because the fastest growing age group in this country is people over the age of 85, and the second is over the age of 100. So we're living almost 20 years longer than our parents or our grandparents lived. And we have to think about how we're going to provide a livable wage, for people who choose to be in that caregiving role, because at some point in our lives, we're all going to need to be or receive care.
Arnold, you know, when I got to CNBC, I was among maybe, I think, 4 people of color on the air. And in the office, it wasn't terribly diverse. I can tell you that today, when I do go back into the office, because I work at a remote office, when I go back in, I look at that floor, apart from the fact that we are just 6 times larger than when I started there.
Right.
There are young people who are diverse, there are a few more managers who are diverse, and it's been a concerted effort, and one where they, in fact, have given us as reporters and producers who are working there, along with the managers, a voice. When we go to the journalist association groups, we hold these panels, and we've hired people from there. I've seen people who I've advocated for, and lo and behold, they show up and accept a job.
Excellent.
How do you do it at Carnival? And certainly in being in a diverse community like Miami, it can't be very hard to be diverse, but how do you find and groom the right candidates?
You know, for us, we have 9 world-leading brands around the world and about 120,000 employees, and they're from about 140 countries, thus the tie. And so they're from all over. And so we have a lot of natural diversity, but as you know, that's not enough. And so what we have to here in Miami, of course, is if we didn't have diversity in the Hispanic representation, we'd be totally underperforming. Carlos Horta was here, I don't know if he still is, but he worked with us for a while as well. Because, Miami, you've got a rich pool to draw from here, but around the world. And so, for us, and for me, it's a little bit different than just diversity. It is inclusion, and it's where the diversity is. And so we have ongoing work, but how I personally do it is I intentionally engineer diversity at the top.
How?
By hiring diverse people at the top, okay? And it is not any more complicated than that, okay? And so I have 9 brand leaders, at the top. Amongst them are, 4 women. I have a member of the LGBT community, a male. I have a guy raised in communist East Germany who was taken at a young age from his family to a sports school. I have an African-American male, running one of the brands. And that's not by accident, okay? I have a woman who, she's fine with me sharing this. She doesn't have a college degree. But neither does our founder and chairman, Mickey Arison, who's a multi-billionaire. He doesn't have a college degree either. And so it's not about, credentials. It's not about, hitting a bunch of, each step of the way and all that. It's about character, leadership, and ability to produce results. And so my African-American male, I should call him by his name, Orlando Ashford, who many people would probably know, he runs Holland America Lines. Orlando never ran a operating business. I mean, he was a consultant. He ran a consulting practice in the HR arena. But I brought him in, made sure other people owned his success, and gave him the opportunity because he had demonstrated the ability to produce results. Christine Duffy, who runs our Carnival line, had never run a major operating business, had never run a cruise line. She had been the head of the industry association, and she had worked as a travel agent and worked for Marriott's, a travel company. But what she had done was demonstrate the ability to get things done and in a lot of different arenas. And so rather than using the traditional criteria, because if I use the traditional criteria, I'm going to get the traditional people, because they're the ones that have the, that's where it is. If you want diversity, you need to be diverse in your approach to diversity. Now, why is it important to have it at the top? Because number one, it makes you a better company. You're going to be able all the stuff I said before. But then number two, people follow those people. And so diversity at the next level becomes a lot easier because people are following those diverse people. And you have to engineer it so that they can be successful. So Orlando, I wouldn't throw him out on his own with a brand in some far-off place. I put him in a brand where the person above him had a huge amount of experience running a brand, a Carnival cruise line, and the people below him knew the business. But he brought something different, and he's been very successful, and similarly with Christine and so on. So that's how you do it, but it has to be intentional and purposeful. And for me, diversity in business is a business imperative. I believe in social justice and rights and all that, but it is a business imperative. So when we were the first to go to Cuba, my general counsel that negotiated that deal was born in Cuba, okay? That makes a big difference. I mean, if he's sitting out talking to people in Cuba, I mean, it's a huge difference.
Well, I'm surprised that they actually did want to talk to him.
And so we were successful in doing something that hadn't been done in 50 years. And the Cubans actually changed a long-standing practice they had, and most of Miami was upset with us because they didn't think it was going to happen. But they changed a long-standing practice they had, and no one Cuban born anywhere in the world could come or go by sea. And they made that announcement to the Cuban people 2 weeks before we sailed. And when they did that, they recognized the company. And I made sure the first people off that ship was Arnie and his wife Carmen, who was also born in Cuba. And so, diversity creates opportunity, and diversity of thinking and diversity of team. And so you have to be intentional, you have to be purposeful, and you have to take some risks, but it's calculated risks. If you know how to judge people, everybody's not going to work out, but enough will. So.
And Tim, you consult a lot in the financial services industry. In a sense, they're in a more consumer-oriented industry, and consumer-oriented industries know that you have to look at the demographics, and particularly you have to look at the large Latino presence in this country. Financial services, kind of different. And, I look at it and I see it, and, when you get a female head of division and she doesn't do well, it's like that just makes it bad for everybody for a long time. It was like, look, we tried, we failed, we're just going to go back to our usual well. How do you, as a consultant, bring that focus, or do you? Is that part of what you do in the business to get them to take a wider view of talent?
Yeah, so we have this at our firm, which is about 55,000 people in the US. We have this wonderful privilege of seeing hundreds of companies a week. And we are in the insides of these companies, at the top, from all the way to the bottom of these organizations. And very often, a CEO, a board, a chief diversity officer will ask our point of view. Sometimes it'll be informal, which to me happens dozens of times a week, where people will ask a point of view. And other times we're actually engaged to help organizations. And a lot of the lessons you just heard are what we're advising companies. But let me be very clear about something. It starts at the top. You hear that all the time, but there are so many unintended biases, in addition to intended biases, that exist in the workplace, that if the CEO isn't willing to break them down, it's not going to happen. Because the forces within an organization on unconscious biases, unintended biases are so great. If the CEO isn't willing to take it on, it's not going to happen. And for those in the audience who are the talent that you're looking for and I'm looking for, if you don't feel that in organizations, it's your prerogative to go look somewhere else. I hope you do see it. The first thing we advise organizations is the CEO has to own this issue. And the group that we started, CEO Action, that's very deliberate. CEO and action. If the CEO isn't going to own the issue, it's not going to happen. By the way, we also advise them, don't use the word journey. To us,
use the word
don't use the word journey. Because journey is a cop-out. Right. No CEO would get in front of the investor community and say, those couple of $1 billion of costs we're going to take out, it's a journey. That business that needs turning around, it's a journey. But diversity, we let people get away with.
Right.
It's a journey. If it's a business imperative, which I wholeheartedly agree with, it can't be a journey. And so what we're advising CEOs is, don't take the cop-out. Don't let it be a journey. Take the forces within your organization and disrupt the status quo. Disrupt it.
And how many CEOs have bought in, because they all give lip service. Yep. They all say they're for it. Yeah. And then you look at the numbers. I mean, Silicon Valley is going to change the world one bro at a time, apparently, from what we've seen. Yeah. It's like, as there was a meme, a friend had this meme a couple of weeks ago for women, sort of saying, you know, men choose high-paying careers. They choose to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. Women choose lower-paying jobs to be women doctors, women lawyers, women engineers. Are they really buying in, or they just know that they need to talk about it?
So look, one of the things I tell you is one of the things I learned in life is you never say all and you never say none, because you'll be wrong, right? And just to be clear, it's mixed, to be very candid, right? There are some who are absolutely leading from the front. I'll tell you a story. About 4 months ago, leading CEO of a bank, top 10 bank in the United States, he called up and he said, I'm not getting it. I set goals with my board and I'm not hitting it. I hear you're up to some really cool stuff at PwC. I hear you're driving some interesting stuff. Can you spend some time with me? 4 hours. 4 hours in the weeds, in what I call the plumbing, in recruiting, in promotion, in advancement, in succession planning, in inclusive leadership, in training around how do you say the word black and not have the word, the hair on your neck skin up, did I say the wrong thing? Like, we spend 4 hours, he'll get his numbers, because he cares. Like, he actually gets it. He invested 4 hours of his time. Others will say, I'll sign the commitment, and you never hear from them again, right? So where we choose is we try to spend our time with people who want to care and who really want to get it done. I think there's a good number out there. But also, to be clear, there's a good number who are paying lip service, and it'll catch up with them. Like, and to be clear, it's a business imperative from a consumer standpoint, but it's also a business imperative from the talent standpoint. Right. We're all in the war for talent. We all need diverse, inclusive talent. We all need tech talent, and I don't want to leave that out of this. And talent will choose where they're going to work. So the ones who haven't made it a priority, they're going to feel it. It's just a question of time.
But we're also in a growing economy, so we are competing for talent. But
we're there.
If we get into a recession, it's not as much of an imperative, or is it?
Well, what I would say is, and this is where I want to bring in, Arnold hit on this, and I want to just bring in this point a little closer. We all need to innovate our businesses. And if we don't have different thinking around the table, not just from skin color, gender, or picket, but also with the tech acumen, if we don't have that on our table, we're not going to innovate our businesses. And I think recession or recession, the businesses that can innovate will be the ones that succeed. And I always tell people, one of my wishes, one of my goals as part of CEO Action is to teach in every college across the United States, is to teach diversity and inclusion, and specifically to teach the demographics, the demographics that you were speaking about. The facts don't lie. In 25 years in the United States, we will not have a majority. We need to understand that. We understand that many MSAs and zip codes in the US today, that's already the case. We also need to teach measurement. In colleges and universities, we teach ROA, ROI, income statement, balance sheet. We don't teach how to calculate a pay gap, and we don't even teach what a ratings gap is. Those are critical measures that leaders need to understand. And then lastly, they need to understand how to lead in a very different world. If we can get those types of things taught in colleges and universities, when we all hire these folks, we can leverage our relationship with the college and universities to have people coming to the workforce that are a heck of a lot more aware, then they'll choose where they want to work.
They can be aware, but, you know, I would dare say my peers, when we grew up and all went out into the workforce in the 80s, that at least I thought, well, you know, this sexism thing is over. You know, I have the same Yale degree as that guy. This, you know, this thing of inclusion and diversity is over because we know we have to do that. Right. And yet that same guy who's a Caucasian realized, well, I'm going to go play golf with my boss even if Bertha's not invited, because that's going to help me get ahead. Yeah. And while his heart may be in the right place, that's the way the rules work. Yeah. And he may not be courageous enough to say, hey, why don't we do something that includes Bertha? Why don't we go to SoulCycle, which would not include Bertha, really. Yeah. I'm just saying that as an example. But, but you know, it's when the rubber meets the road, how do you get people to sort of stand up and say, no, 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 you need to include Bertha, you need to include, you know, Arnold as well?
Well, I think, as the other panelists have said, I think it starts at the top. My SVP for Human Resources, Marjorie Powell, is sitting here in the front row, and Marjorie's been with us for just a little over a year, and I remember the conversation. She came to me and said, so do we need to have a chief diversity officer? And my response was, No, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer. I'm the one that's responsible to make sure that everyone in my organization understand it's everybody's job to reach out and select people who represent our members all across this country.
So you feel having that title puts it in a special outside?
Well, I will tell you that I came up through the ranks in my career of being the Minority Affairs Advisor, the Chief Diversity Officer, over the Director of Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity.
The check the list executive.
To do those. And I will tell you, it depends on the person. Yeah. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter what school you went to. It's the person and whether or not they have the courage to lead and do what's right versus, is this going to affect me personally, or if I can go to play golf, to be there, or do you have the courage to stand up and say, no, we need to not fill this job until we have a group of candidates that are diverse that we can interview, and that you're making that choice deliberately about how you select people and bring them in to give them an opportunity to succeed. I'm fortunate that my board, I have a chair who's a female, and 60% of my board is women and minorities. And so, and on my executive team, we are 70% minorities and women. And so we have deliberately taken steps to get to that point, because it wasn't like that when I came to AARP by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that the staff seeing me saying, no, I'm taking responsibility for the people that we hire and the selections that we make, and I hold my team responsible throughout the organization for the selections that they make, because it isn't until you actually get people, minorities, other underserved groups in the workforce that you're going to get these better outcomes. And if we're designing programs and services to serve the community, then they need to be reflective of the people that we're serving.
They also need to be reflected at the top, because a lot of companies are fine getting people in, and they start losing them as they move up the ranks. I remember, it's a story that I tell again and again, because I just remember when I was on the board of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, we had the head of the Newspaper Association. And this was a while back when we were just starting to get computerized. And so she was saying, well, you guys really need to work on your database so we can identify candidates. And I remember, porque no tengo pelo en la lengua, that means I don't have hair in my tongue. It's a Latin expression. I said, you're right, that's true, fair point. But why is it when a senior editor at a paper hires or promotes a white man, if he happens to be white, who looks just like him, he doesn't need to go to a database to find that person? Mm-hmm. Why does he need to go to the database to find the same traits that he has in someone who happens to look like me? And I wonder about that when you start getting to the top, particularly when you talk about boards. You talked about your board being diverse, and the Alliance of Board Diversity talked about the fact that in 2018, most recent data, there is more diversity on boards. Over 40% of them have diversity, and that Black women and Asian women have made the biggest gains. Of course, look at the asterisk, what we're talking about in terms of gains. When you look at the Fortune 500, 84% are still white. They said that minorities make up about 16%. Most women, minority women, I think I got this backwards, minority men, 11.5%, minority women, 4.6%. Latinos, Hispanics, 3.9%, all told. Asian, 3.7%. So if you look at demographics, Blacks, African Americans, 8.6%. You look at demographically, Asians have a bigger representation proportionately than Blacks and Hispanics on corporate boards in the Fortune 500s. some of the people who are on those boards, Arnold, you are not just on your board, but you also serve on the Bank of America board and the Crown Holdings boards. So you're filling up 3 spots.
Yeah.
How did you get in the room in those boards, and how do you get more people into those rooms, those boardrooms?
Yeah, you know, the history is pretty bad. And in fact, I think this may be the first year that we can actually say it's gotten better.
Right.
In like, I don't know how many years, because
Right.
for a while it was regressing on boards. And, you know, I think I'm only on 2 now because, you know, they have these rules now that you can only, if you're a sitting CEO, you can only be on 1 board other than your own. So I had to drop Crown. So I'm working really hard at Crown to try to get them to replace me with a diverse candidate. I've done that before I left, and I'm going to continue to do that. I think I'm crossing my fingers to see what they do, and doing more than crossing my fingers, but offering them candidates and so on. But you know how it happens. You know, board work is, you know, these guys on boards too. It's pretty basic. Somebody asks you to join. Now, how does that come to be?
Yeah.
My very first board was a little small company, Oil Dry. They made cat litter. They were selling material to our corporation. I was at Monsanto company at the time. And the head of our manufacturing operations was asked to go on their board. And he said, I've got somebody better for you than me. And I was, you know, I was in my 30s, actually, 38 or something. And so he recommended, I met the family, and it was a family-owned business, and they liked me, so I went on. Then I showed up in Forbes or Fortune, one of those, I can't remember, for some stuff I had done in the industry. It was the agriculture industry at the time. And the guys at Crown saw it, and they were looking to add. Somehow they found out I was Catholic, the chairman was Catholic, and so on and so forth, I don't know. The general counsel had a great relationship with the Pope at the time, or whatever. And we got secret tours in the Vatican. It was cool stuff. But in any event, you know, they found me somehow through the, you know, just seeing me in a publication, and check came out to fly out and check me out, and I went on. Then once you're on a couple of boards,
Right.
Yeah.
Now you're a known
then
quantity.
it happens. So now, you know, I'm turning down, and I have for years now, turning down way more.
Sure.
And try to offer candidates that I know when I say I can't do it, here's somebody you want to look at. And you know, I've been somewhat successful, but not as successful I like to have been in getting people placed. But that's it. You got to get on that first one. And I'm sure everybody's got their own story at the first one, but once you're on, then you're in the club, and people know about you. I think just a general comment on that is that, you know, the board thing is really important, okay? I mean, boards do oversight, they don't run businesses, they don't, but having that seat at the table to oversee overall what the company is doing, especially in regards to, you know, just, you know, stewarding the shareholders' assets by ensuring that you have a diverse talent pool that's going to deliver the results. And it's really, really important to have diversity there. I think a lot of companies recognize that, but you start off with a quote saying 40% of them were diverse.
Yeah.
I mean, 40, why isn't 100%, why aren't
Right.
100% diverse, you know what I mean? So that's how far we have to go. And I would just throw out to all of you, any of you sitting on boards, I would encourage you to consider one of your primary obligations is to get someone else to sit on a board.
Amen.
And if we kind of all do that and make it purposeful, we can make a change.
I was surprised because I got a call recently, and I can't sit on a corporate board or for profit.
Right.
But it was interesting. So this fellow was a friend of mine, and he was a friend who, his friend had a fintech company. So he was looking for a female board member and a female of color. So a friend of a friend called me.
Right.
And I'm just sitting here thinking, if this guy's in financial technology, why does he know these women?
Right.
And is it his friend who's saying to him, hey, maybe you should look for a woman of color? And it was like, all right, well, I can't, but here are 5 names. You know, it's like, it's not that hard. at least to me, it wasn't that hard. Look on CNBC, we have some of them. And Melody Hobson comes to mind as like huge superstar in
She's on too many
finance.
boards.
She's
but,
on a
yeah.
bunch.
That's what I was thinking. Maybe, but call her. I'm sure she knows
She
other
knows a lot
people
of people.
too, right?
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I was flattered, but I just thought, you got to be able to find more people in a less roundabout way than that.
You just have to be intentional and purposeful. This is all about what, you have to be purposeful. You have to own it. You have to say, this is important to our corporation. We're going to get it done. It cracks me up when people, it's the same thing he said, nobody says, well, we're going to think about making some profits. Or, profits, we're going to get to that. Right now we just got more important stuff.
Well,
that never happened.
It depends on the kind of company that you're on.
Right.
Well, if you're on a company that's going to survive, they don't say that, right? And so the bottom line is that, it has to be intentional and purposeful. And I think for a lot of people, for it to be that, they have to get the core value. If they don't own the core value, if they think they're doing it because that's what everybody's doing, or they're doing it because they don't want to have a bad name in the paper, those are, some motivations. But it's got to be, it's got to be in your core. Yeah. And if it is, just like everything else in business, if you're successful at it, you make it happen. And it has to be purposeful and intentional. So I think the challenge is those that are in a position to do have to do, and then those, and they have to encourage others, which is exactly what he said. And I'm doing and she's doing. You have to encourage others, but it has to be purposeful and intentional, and you have to own it. And if you do, you will make it happen. I'm from the school of no excuses. So if you believe that you got to make something happen, you just go make it happen. And otherwise, and I'm not opposed to, the chat sessions and the training programs, but I've seen that stuff since the 70s.
Yeah.
We're now talking almost 2020. And we've had the open dialogues, and it's not bad stuff. It's good stuff. It's good human being stuff. So I wouldn't knock it, okay? But if you want it to really happen, you have to own it and decide, I'm going to have a diverse team of talented people who can produce outstanding results, and that's what's going to happen here. And you got no excuse. You got to go make it happen.
Just to build off Arnold's point, and the companies that we see. I tell people it's easy to be the CEO of PwC. You just copy all the good ideas from your good clients, and the ones you don't do, you don't do it. Like the companies that are deliberate in succession planning at every level, because Bertha, you said earlier, at the entry level, most companies are pretty diverse. When you look at whether men, women, or even racial, when you look at just improvements that we see, but then over time, people leave the company, you end up with the white guys. And the companies that have done very successful in deliberate succession planning, not just having somebody on the slate, but moving that person to the slate, taking that chance that people see on highly qualified people, those companies tend to have better track records. But it's like, let's be honest, it's exhausting. And if the CEO isn't committed to exhausting, you're not going to get there. Because the point, you can have all the chat you want, but ultimately the CEO's got to say, we're going to make this happen consistently over and over and over again. And I'll just share with you a humble story about PwC. We realized that after 15 years, because we've been at this for 20 years at the firm right now, deliberate, and we had a lot of programs over the first 15 years. And we had done well relative to others, but relative is not the right measure here when you look at where we all need to be. What we realize is many of our majority simply didn't know. And what I mean by that is they didn't go, I'm going to go back to your golf story. Many didn't know. And what we did is we actually took a step backwards 3 years ago, and we said we want to make it safe for everybody to understand what's really on our minds. Now, we started out with Black because that's where most companies have the biggest gap, and I will acknowledge Latino and Hispanic is pretty damn close to where we are in Black. What we said is we want to open the dialogue for people to really understand. Now, to be very candid, I had to be careful on women because we had made a lot of progress on women, not anywhere near enough, but just a hell of a lot more than we had on Black and Latino, to be clear. And we started having dialogues around what it was like to be Black and Latino in the workplace. we learn things about each other that we just didn't know. We should have known.
Give me something you learned about
So I
being
learned that
Latino.
many of our black professionals carry their business card with their license because they're afraid about getting pulled over. I learned that some of our black professionals in our New York office, when they take off their suit and they're going to play softball in Central Park and they put their lid on and their tattoos are showing, they feel unsafe in our hallways. By the way, I didn't just learn it. On July 21st, 2016, I shut our firm down for a day so we could all talk about it and so we could all learn about it. Now, you can't just stop there, because if you do that, it's just one good conversation, and what good is that? So then you build on that the deliberateness of then making it happen. I'm going to fast forward to 2 years later. We were at an all-partner meeting, and my partners vote me in. To be very clear, it's one partner, one vote. We're in a room like this with 1,000 partners, so a third of my partners. And one of our black partners in the back left corner of the room stood up. His first name is Derek. He said, Tim, he said, we've been doing a lot, and it's clear that there's a lot of deliberateness happening, finger on the scale, to be very clear. He said, do you think all the partners are with you? Unscripted. I said, Derek, I said, one of the hardest challenges about being a CEO and a leader is knowing what everybody thinks. Because there's too many people. Like, you think you're doing the right thing. I said, I honestly don't know, but here's what I do know. I do know at our core we care about one another. I believe that. What I believe is the more we understand what it's like to be left out of that golf match, what it's like to be told you're a woman in tech and you don't belong, if we understand that, we're more likely to be inclined to act. And I think one of the biggest things we can all do is make sure you share what you feel. And by the way, if the culture doesn't allow for that, you should leave. But I think one of the things we have to do is create this environment where we all understand what it's really like to be left behind, and then count on leadership to get it done. You need both. If you have one without the other, it's not going to work. But I truly believe in what we're seeing at the firm is the more we open up the dialogue to really share these stories of what it's like, the more inclined the majorities like to act.
And then the only, real quickly, because of the golf thing in particular, people can't just let things become handicaps. I did not play golf.
Yeah.
My first boss, after we went through a little bit of a revolution with each other, he gave me 3 sets of golf clubs during the time I worked with him, because he thought you're never going to make it if you don't play golf. I never played golf, okay? And so you got to be in the right organizations. If it's a results-oriented organization, do not kid yourself. I don't care how many outside acknowledgments you get, how many mentors you have, you got to have results, okay? And if you're producing results, it changes a whole lot of things. So as you're coaching people, coach them to focus on results that matter to the corporation, okay? Please don't coach them on make sure you pick up the golf club and to do this and that. Now, some service organizations are a little different with client relationship building things, but I was in sales and I never played golf. And so I think that it's so important you focus your energy on the things that truly matter. And I just wanted to throw it out so that people don't get hung up on, so you're not invited to that. That's not your problem. That's their problem. Never let other people's problem become your problem, okay? That is not your problem. They have a problem. They're missing out. And if something needs to get done, it has to be said. You find a way to get it done and say it. And I know this sounds simple and declarative, but it really is like that, like for real.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
I was just going to add that most corporations, when they're going out looking for board members, and they hire the executive search firm, but the majority of people placed on boards come from another board member recommending a person.
Right.
And so I think for all of us who sit on corporate boards, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're just not sending the resume, but we're sponsoring that next person to get on the board. Because I would say 8 out of 10 doesn't come through the search firm. It comes through another person who's already sitting on that board, making it a recommendation and vouching for this person that they ought to be on a corporate board.
Yeah.
Before I open it up to the audience, we're all boomers, I think, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me, the millennial generation Yeah, I'm sorry, skipping over Gen X, sorry, guys.
Everybody
But
does.
they're very different. My husband's son was talking to his colleague, and he, through fluke, wound up getting a higher pay than his colleague who had been there 6 months, who had been helping to train him. And they talked about their salaries. And so his colleague went in and said, hey, he's making this much. I think I should be making at least that because I've been here longer. And lo and behold, he got the raise. But my husband and I were both like, ooh, you know, we would never think to do that, right? I would never think to do that with someone else. But at the same time, I think millennials, you know, the wonderful thing about their entitlement is they feel like they're entitled to transparency and they're entitled to tell you that, hey, I think this should be better. Do you feel as though they are helping to push from the bottom what you are trying to push from the top?
So can I start? Because we have 55,000 people, average age is 28, and we have 83% millennials. Absolutely, is the answer to your question. We've done 2 major studies with London School of Business and USC on what millennials want. We've revamped our entire organization to make sure we meet what our folks want. That's how we serve our clients, by having the best workforce. And they fully expect transparency. They fully express that the organization is going to stand for something other than making a buck, and I couldn't agree more with the results point, but they expect that we stand for something a lot bigger than that, right. And that's an outcome of doing everything well, serving your clients and your communities and reinvesting in their future. But they also expect an organization that's going to give them opportunity. So it is transparency around pay, and we've 5 years ago changed that model around transparency, but they're also looking for an organization that's going to invest in them. And they're going to invest in, one big example is technology upskilling right now. If an organization is investing in their employees, and millennials expect that.
Does diversity matter to them?
Without a doubt. So we invest across 3 elements. We invest in whatever degree somebody has or experience, whether it be tax or consulting or auditing. In addition to their core expertise, we invest in technology upskilling. And we believe that will be a required employee benefit in the next 3 to 5 years, like healthcare and insurance and basic employee benefit. Digital upskilling, also mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, and then the big societal issues that define our time. Inclusion, equality, climate, and that's our people want to see all of those things. And if we hadn't evolved over the last 5 years to meet those needs, we wouldn't be winning the war for talent at the end of the day. So they expect it all. And it's not isolated to any one part, it's an entire generation. So we've been forced to change to adapt the workplace to give all those things. By the way, to the results again, our clients want that too. Right? So it's a good match.
And we're fast approaching a time when we're going to have 4 generations in the workplace at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so companies, organizations that can manage that multiple generations are going to see much more improvement in their return on investment, both human capital as well as financials, to be able to do that. One of the things that I think was surprising to me at AARP is that every summer we hire a couple hundred interns. And usually I talk with them at the beginning and at the end. And I was going through the graduation ceremony, and one gentleman stood up and said, we have had a great time here. We can't believe AARP is so innovative, but Mrs. Jenkins, every one of the jobs we post requires 15 to 20 years experience. That our system was designed that, hey, we want people to come in and they can hit the ground running. We have some of the experts in health and financial resilience in the workplace, but that was a barrier that we were creating for ourselves, of saying that you had to have 10 or 15 years experience. And so we had to go back and rethink, how do we create those career ladders that if we were investing in bringing in 200 or 300 interns every summer, but really we're not planning on hiring them for until 10 or 15 years from now, it just didn't make sense. And so I also think that we have to look at how do we bring multiple generations to the workplace, putting in the teams. And I was just listening as Tim was saying, I have 2 millennial Gen Y kids. My daughter works at Google, and she occasionally calls me for advice. And I say, oh, I wouldn't do that. And she says, well, it's transparency. They ought to be telling me this. I need a performance a review every 3 months. I need to know where I'm going, what I'm doing. I was like, oh my God, how can we manage with all of these Gen Ys and these millennials? But is it exactly that? They come into the workplace and they assume that they're equal. And I think that's what you're seeing, and that's the way they're presenting themselves, and I think that's the way companies such as ours have to adapt to the expectations of younger workers, regardless of their diversity, coming into the workplace and how they've grown up, that we're all the same, and that, you know, you're hiring me and I should be the same as Arnold and Tim, and I should have that same ability to succeed in the workplace. And I think that's going to be different because there is going to be such a shortage of workers. And I was thinking earlier as we were talking about what does the future of work look like. And we know, talking to CEOs all across this country, that there is going to be this need to continuously educate people well beyond college. Right. And that community colleges are going to play such an important role, that 10 of the most in-demand jobs for elementary school kids today hasn't even been invented yet. And so how do we work with community colleges and four-year institutions to prepare the workforce for the future? And how does diversity and inclusion play into those? Because we know that the majority of people attending community colleges are people of color. And so how do we make sure that we as CEOs are working with corporations that are in our communities to make sure that they understand their needs of what the future of the workforce is going to look like, and how do we work to make sure that we're preparing people to be there?
Especially as we all rely more on AI, if you're going to have those inherent biases, the ageism, sexism, and not looking at people of color, right, then what good is it? Yes.
And in the spirit of diversity, you know, any label is kind of disabling. And millennials are not all alike. No. And millennials haven't all grown up the same way, and they haven't all had the same experiences. And I'm sure in your sessions, when you have the chat groups and stuff, there's a lot of self-awareness going on amongst millennials as well. And so I think in the end, people are people. Yeah. And a generation has been exposed to different things than the generation before them and the one before that and so on. So there may be some tendencies or some over-indexing, but in the end, people are people. Yeah. And you really, for the millennials, we need to pay attention so they can pay attention as they mature in the workforce, because they still have, amongst millennial populations, there's still a lot of preconceived notions, attitudes and biases and stuff that can inhibit them being successful and certainly their colleagues.
Thank all of you for being here.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.